Okay, welcome to you all. Welcome back. It's amazing that we already are at the third day of our conference. So welcome to all of you who joined maybe for the first time, or all the other people who maybe joined for the third day. Just to bring it back to the whole conference theme. So as discussed on Monday, we look at responsible doctoral education, and we looked at this in the reverse order. So on Monday, we looked at how do we prepare students to go to the job markets, what is needed to do that. And then yesterday, we looked at what does this mean in terms of supervision, how to organize the doctoral journey, the engagement, how to make sure people finish in time. And today, we look at the final angle being the recruitment process. So first of all, we have this panel looking at how to make sure that we have the necessary diversity within our student population, how to make sure we recruit the right people for our doctoral programs. And then afterwards, we will have a serious game of Grenoble Business School. And then we end with a wrap-up of the conference. So that's the program of this afternoon or this morning, depending on your time zone. I'm happy that we have a great panel today of people representing different organizations that are specialized in PhD recruitments. We have Stacee of ETS Global. We have Mark Bennett of FindAPhD. And then we have Brian Jones of DocNet. So thank you for joining us today and to share your expertise. I leave you in the safe hands of Vassili, who will facilitate the panel discussion. So Vassili, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva. Good day to all. So for the short hour we've got ahead of us, we are discussing the recruitment process, so trends in the recruitment process. And we have subsumed this theme into three sub-themes and questions. The first one is how can we identify what applicants expect of a doctoral program? The second one, how to guarantee that resources are sufficient to cover student needs? And thirdly, how can we ensure a broad enough recruitment for a diverse doctoral student population? Our three panelists will speak on each theme. After each of them has spoken, there will be a few minutes left for your questions and comments. Please type your questions and comments in the chat. Eva will then, after the presentations, will then report the questions or comments that seem to be of a broad appeal or that seem to be recurrent. And once we're done with the first theme, then we move on to the second one. So thank you very much again. Now on the first one, how can we identify what applicants expect of a doctoral program? Mark, if you will start, you're on.
Thanks very much, Vassili. Hi, everyone. Very quickly, so I represent FindAPhD. We are a sort of recruitment website for PhD study around the world. I'll be talking here a little bit about some research we've done. The slides that, well, so we don't have slides here, but some of the data I'll be talking about, you can see some visualizations of that on your app, or you will be able to. Anyway, so just getting straight into it then. So if we think about expectations of weekly workload, what's quite surprising actually is that, well, surprising but also not surprising, students do expect the PhD workload to be very, very heavy. So 50%, half of the part-time students we survey expect actually their PhD to be more or less the equivalent of a full-time job. And when we survey full-time students, the majority of those also expect to be working, part-time or full-time during their PhD. Okay, and along with that, we see a lot of uncertainty. So one of the things I think I see in my role talking to prospective students and asking about their concerns and so on is that the workload for a PhD and the structure for a PhD is actually very nebulous and kind of anecdotal. People will hear a bit about it from people they know, or of course using resources like ours, kind of stereotypes and so on. But they don't really, whilst it's familiar to us, it's not necessarily familiar to prospective students. So I would say there's a concern that actually in many cases students may expect the workload to be actually even heavier than it is. and that this is something definitely, if we're thinking about responsible doctoral recruitment, this is something that schools and programs perhaps need to help clarify a bit more and set responsible expectations for what doctoral study is actually going to be like. When we think about careers, again, it's no surprise that the majority are thinking of an academic career. So 62% of people in our data set say that, yes, it's an academic career I have in mind after my PhD. But there are two things I point out here. The first is that that's only 62%. So there's another 20% that are considering specific non-academic roles. For these kind of programs we're talking about today, they tend to be in management or governance and so on. But there's another 20% who are very uncertain. So people who are entering a PhD, around about a fifth of prospective PhD students, don't actually know what they want to do afterwards. And when we think about that 62%, we know that only around 20 to 30% of PhD graduates do go on to have academic careers. The number varies depending on where you get your data from. Again, I think expectations here, we need to make sure that these are clear and they're realistic. So, again, we have that sense that a lot of people just aren't actually sure what they can do with a PhD. And a lot of them, I don't wish to be cruel really, but a lot of people are thinking, oh, I'm going to just go and get an academic job. That's certainly what I thought when I went into my doctorate many years ago now. And actually we know, don't we, that that's not the reality for many students. So when we're thinking about this from the point of view of programs and schools, I think it is really important to provide real examples. Okay, it's a great way to support responsible recruitment and actually differentiate your programs from others. If you can go, right, look, this is what people have actually gone on from our doctoral program to do. They obviously will include some academic work, but they'll include all sorts of other things that prospective students actually just aren't aware of at all. So if I was to summarize my kind of perspective on this, really, I think it's that, where we sit, we are very aware of what a PhD involves, and certainly at your institutions you will be. But we've got to remember there's a huge amount of uncertainty, even for students who are engaged with a resource like ours, which is obviously, we try and make sure it's fairly comprehensive and detailed and so on. They're obviously looking for information, but there is a lot of uncertainty. And I think some of the obvious things we can do to encourage responsible recruitment are simply to be a lot clearer about what's involved, what PhD students do, and what they go on to do. And actually, I'll hand over then to my co-panelists.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for those broad insights and those figures, facts and figures. Now, I think Brian has some other experiences to share with us.
Yeah, thank you. Again, my name is Brian, and I'm representing DocNet. DocNet is a consortium of over 130 schools that promote the PhD in business, and we spend a lot of time together recruiting students into our programs. And on this question, to me, it's sort of a combination of you want to try to find out what students' expectations are, and you also want to spend some time managing those expectations so that the students have a very realistic view of what's expected in your program. So for me, one of the first things that you need to do is look inward, and you need to understand what your program is really good at providing to these prospective students. So what are the research interests of your faculty? Where does the expertise lie within that research? And promote that research in whatever medium that you can. On your website, we actually produce a booklet that has all the research interests of our faculty. So you want to make it clear to the students what your faculty can provide to them so they have a realistic view of what they will be studying once they come into your institution. I think the other thing that's important is to understand that students are researching what you're doing and how successful your program is. So you want to take a look at your track record. Where are you placing students? You also want to take a look at the careers of your alumni. Where your students place at first isn't going to be the same as where they sort of develop their career over time. And so you want to take a look at where are students placing straight out of your program. There's going to be an expectation on behalf of the prospective students that they will get placements similar to what your graduates are getting straight out of the program. And you also want to take a look at the trajectory of the careers of your students, your alumni, because again, they're going to expect that they will have a similar trajectory over the course of their career. Students are researching these things, so I think it's really important that you think about your website, think about the publications that you're pushing out, making sure that you're providing information to these students so that they have an easy time of figuring out your program. I think the other thing that is important is that you understand what's happening with your admitted students. So you're going to make admission offers. Some of those admission offers are going to be accepted and some of those admission offers are going to be declined. And you want to find out, for the students that are accepting your admission offers, who are they turning down, right? So who are the folks that you're competing against, so that you understand, you can take a look at their programs, you can see sort of where you're positioned against these other schools. And then the other thing that you want to do is take a look at where students are going if they turn you down. Again, that will sort of give you a perspective of where you're positioned and how you can appeal to these students. And then the other thing that you can do is you can engage with your prospective students. So one of the things that we do when we are out recruiting students is we ask them to register for our events. And as they're registering for our events, we will ask them particular kinds of things, like when do they plan on starting a PhD? What is the area of study? You could also ask them other questions that you're interested in terms of trying to figure out what their expectations are of your program. The other thing is, if you are able to engage with students in in-person events, that's a really nice opportunity for you to figure out sort of what are the expectations of the students that are looking at your program. And I'll turn it over to Stacey now.
Thank you, Brian. So Mark talked to you a little bit about what the numbers say as far as what prospects are expecting of a program. And Brian spoke with you about leveraging different stakeholders in determining what these expectations are. I'm going to speak with you about something that Brian kind of alluded to, which is your competition. So I'm going to speak to you about actually how to leverage your competitors into helping you predict expectations. So I represent GRE. I'm a member of their business school advisory committee, but my primary position at my own college, the University of South Florida, is that I'm a program administrator for our doctoral programs. And our program has a continuous improvement process that includes an external review. And that external review is conducted by peer and aspirate institutions. So each of our disciplines chooses peer and aspirate institutions to invite to our campus for a 2-day process. The first day they're on our campus, they're meeting with all of our stakeholders. So they're meeting with our current students, our faculty, our college leadership, staff, and potentially even alumni. Now, the alumni wouldn't be there in person, obviously, because they're spread across the country in their own placements, but those would be virtual meetings. And they're asking all of the hard questions. So they're looking for gaps, and they're also identifying strengths of your program. The second day is spent reviewing their findings with the college leadership and the doctoral policy committee. And that's followed up by a formal written report. But the insights that come out of this exercise are invaluable. It's basically a SWOT analysis from your competitors. Our last external review that we had for our college led us to make changes in recruitment efforts, mentoring throughout the program, job market preparation, and even funding based on what we found out were the expectations of the new PhD student. So in terms of recruitment, they addressed the lack of diversity in some of our concentrations and made suggestions on niche areas that we could target in industry for applicants with real world experience. They gave us best practices from their own institution on how to recruit from programs you wouldn't necessarily think of as your typical applicant pool. One expectation of applicants that they honed in on that we were lacking in our current program was mentoring throughout the program and job market preparation. This led us to make changes to our annual review process and put in place a research presentation milestones throughout the program. In addition, we developed a process for mock interviews starting with the area or discipline coordinator, moving on to the chair or director of the school, and then ending with our dean to emulate as closely as possible what a student would go through when they're going through their interviews. And the last item that really opened our eyes was just how many programs that we consider to be peer or aspirant have funding for a 5th year, and the applicants are looking for that. They're looking for the potential of that in their admission decisions. So prospective PhD students are more informed than ever. They have all of these resources to research. So they don't want to hear that additional funding may be considered at some point down the line. They want to know the whole financial package up front and how they can make the most of it. So being a state institution, we obviously had to stay within parameters of our budget, but the external review started the process of us moving towards a 5th year funding. And currently, as a result of this external review and to address that expectation, we're offering funding to students who have an R&R and a top journal by January of their 4th year. So these are just a few examples of how your competitors can actually assist you in determining what your future students want to see in your program. It may be an uncomfortable process, obviously, when they're pointing out gaps or weaknesses in your program, but all meaningful insights that lead to change are really worth it to improve your program and to make sure you're delivering what your applicants are expecting. And I'll turn it back to Vassili.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stacee. Now we have time, well, we've got a few minutes for questions, remarks, or whatsoever. For now, I see nothing in the chat, but please feel free to post your questions, and Eva will report them to us. Or if for now there are no questions, we can move on, and perhaps some questions will arise later on at the end of the session. So let's see how things go. If we do not have questions now, it's not time which is wasted, it's time we can reuse at the end of the session. So as for now, I see no, just one point, funding is a key issue. Certainly, it certainly is. So I suggest moving on to the second question, and then we'll see how the conversation goes. How to guarantee that resources are sufficient to cover student needs? Mark, your insights are more than welcome to start, please.
Thank you very much, Vassili. So yes, obviously one of the things we ask students, is first of all, what do you value in a school? So what is it you're actually looking for when you're thinking about a PhD program? What we did was gave them various options. So opportunities for professional development, specific facilities, whether that's infrastructure, archives, and so on and so forth. Metrics such as rankings, or indeed, insofar as this can be a metric, the perceived quality of academic staff, so on and so forth. And what we see here actually is it's professional development, so opportunities for professional development that come out way ahead. So these are important to, 88% of people say these are very, very important to me when I'm considering different programs for doctoral study. And, in comparison, the presence and perceived quality of academic staff is very, very important to 49% of people. So yes, it's still a factor, but it's nowhere near professional development, which is interesting, I think. And then metrics such as rankings are important to around about 40% of people. I would just comment a little bit on the rankings. Obviously, we know that rankings are important, and certainly when we're thinking about, business schools and so on, accreditation is hugely important. In my role, I talk to literally hundreds of students a year, and face to face in a normal year, at our events and so on. And I'm really privileged. I get to hear about, I get to interact with a very broad range of students and see what their concerns are and so on. So I know, what they're actually thinking about. And it's certainly true. They do consider rankings and they do consider accreditation. What I think is happening here, though, is that these are not really definitive when they've got kind of a short list in mind. These sort of metrics aren't necessarily definitive. It's those added opportunities, the internships you can offer, your partnerships with business and industry and so on, that are going to be the thing that decides them. I suspect rankings and academics are much further up what we might call the funnel, in my marketing terms when people are considering which schools to consider in the first place. We also asked prospective doctoral students what their biggest concerns were about doing a PhD. And here I think, you know, the most important, it won't surprise you, I'm sure if we had time I could poll and you'd all get it right, it's cost. So cost and funding. You know, I can call back here to what Stacey was saying previously, that this is so important, really. So 88% of people say that, you know, their biggest concern is actually is the cost of doctoral study. And obviously this varies hugely around the world because support for doctoral study varies hugely around the world. My advice is perhaps not, you know, mind-blowing, but, you know, wherever possible, and again, it's coming from the point of view of someone who talks to lots of prospective students, try and offer a holistic view of the financials for your students, okay? What is it actually? So you'll have your scholarships, you know, whether it's government funding, your own funding, etc., etc. Student loans are even available here in the UK, so there's all sorts of different options. But you know, try and offer that kind of real holistic view of what students actually do on your programs. What does it actually cost to live and study in your area, and what do people do about it? I think that kind of social proof, we might say, is so valuable if you can provide those kind of case studies. The next biggest concern is work-life balance. Again, that's not going to surprise us. And this is, again, somewhere where I think it's really important to exemplify good practice. You know, there are going to be some really unhealthy expectations and stereotypes for doctoral study. And again, I'm really thinking that our theme here is responsible recruitment. You know, I've already talked in my previous section about some of the expectations and how I think they're a bit extreme and unrealistic. So again, you know, try and exemplify good practice in your current students. They definitely work hard, but how do they work? What's their work-life balance? You know, perhaps someone could talk through a typical week. A video would be ideal, wouldn't it? You know, so on and so forth. Perhaps a dual profile of a student and a supervisor. How do they actually work together and so on? The next biggest concern is careers. I don't, you know, that's a concern for almost 3/4 of students. I don't think there's much more I can add really here. I think Brian's advice was excellent, actually. You know, showcase alumni. I thought that was a really good point as well. Not just, you know, what people do immediately after a doctorate, but where are they 5 years, 10 years on? You know, get those case studies in there and get away from that academic, non-academic binary, because non-academic is a huge category. They can do all sorts of exciting things. I'm not an academic. I love my job with my PhD.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Mark. Then Brian. So Brian, you will have some insights regarding internal resources.
Yes, and I think one of my initial thoughts in looking at this question is there's no way that you can guarantee sufficient resources by yourself. I'm here representing DocNet, but I am the managing director of the PhD program at the University of Michigan. And it's me and one other person. And my colleagues in DocNet, a lot of my colleagues are a one-person office. And so there's no way that a one-person office can meet all the needs of your students. So for me, it's really important that you focus on collaboration. I'm going to share a couple ideas and then give you an example of something that we do at Michigan. So the first thing for me is it's really important for you to collaborate within your school and across your institution. And one of the things that we did a few years ago is we noticed that the mental health concerns for our students were starting to increase a little bit. And so what we did is we brought together a group of faculty and staff and PhD students, and we formed a committee. We call it the Uplift Committee, and the focus of the Uplift Committee is to focus on PhD student well-being. And so we're trying to sort of figure out what are the concerns of our students around well-being, and we think about mental health, physical health, and spiritual health, and what can we do to help our students in these areas. So we are talking about it in this committee. We're offering programs to students. We're allowing students to give us information within that area. Another thing that you can do is you can leverage resources provided by other units. And one of the things that we've done in this area is we have a unit on our campus called the English Language Institute. And one of the things that they do is they help PhD students with speaking and writing. And so what we did is we got together with folks in the English Language Institute, and we started a summer institute that focuses on helping PhD students improve their writing and speaking skills. Now, these are two things that will probably define where a student's going to place and will probably help define that student's career as well. So we think this is really important. And we were able to engage 2 of the faculty within the English Language Institute to run our summer institute and help our students with their academic presentation, academic writing skills. And we've gotten some very good feedback from that program. The other thing is to do what you can to help to develop a supportive community within your program. And one of the things that we've done in this area is we have a PhD student organization. We call it the PhD Forum. And there are various positions that that students fill within the PhD Forum. And so it sort of becomes the situation where they're now becoming self-governing. And one of the things that we know about colleges and universities is they are governed by faculty. And so it both helps develop a supportive community within our program, but it also helps them develop the skills that they're going to need if they go into the academic arena in terms of being a person who's going to govern at their institution. One of the other things that's really important is to focus on faculty and student relationships. Our graduate school provides a program. It's a mentorship program, and the student and their faculty advisor can attend the program. And what they do is they work on their advising relationship. There is a form that they fill out that gets at some of the touch points of student-faculty advising relationships, and they come to an agreement about how they want that relationship to look.
Thank you very much, Brian. I suppose you would like to say much more, but now it is Stace's time. So Stacee, you can share with us your insights.
Sure. So I'm going to kind of touch on 2 of the trends that Mark identified that are a concern for students as far as resources go. The first of which is cost. Obviously, that's their main concern. And this goes hand in hand with our program and making sure resources are enough for the students that we admit. First of all, we never admit students for the sake of just granting more PhD degrees. We have a very strategic admissions process whereby we only bring in 2 students per concentration or discipline per year. And that's twofold. For one, we only have the human capital to properly mentor and supervise 8 students per concentration. And our current time to graduation is 4.5 years approximately. So on average, we can have 2 students starting each year to stay within what we are capable of properly mentoring. This allows us also to make a financial offer to each of the students that we admit. Now, we do get a number of applications from self-funded students, which I'm sure is common across many programs. However, we make sure that we treat those the same way that we do to students who would be looking for full funding. So there's no difference in the application process for them. Even if we're not sponsoring a stipend for those students, they're still taking resources to support in the form of faculty supervision. So as a result, self-funded students have to be considered top candidates in our disciplines for us to consider admitting them. And before our committees can make an admission offer to them, they have to provide a plan to our college leadership of how they would be able to support this student from a faculty perspective. This exercise requires that each discipline really take a look at themselves and evaluate whether they're stretched thin with their normal 8 students across a 4-year time frame, or whether they think that they have additional capacity to facilitate, a proper mentoring of a self-funded student. So ideally, the goal for all of our graduates is to get a good placement, which for us means that they would be placed at another PhD granting institution, or ideally another Research 1 institution, which is what we're classified as. The financial package that we offer includes a yearly stipend, health insurance subsidy, partial tuition waiver, travel funding, and dissertation expense funding. Those last two are what I want to share just a little bit more about, because stipends, tuition coverage, even health insurance are probably not unique. Those are what we consider the bare minimums for the student to be able to survive, given the cost of living in our locale. But the travel funding and the dissertation expense funding speak to resources on professional development, and that can be a factor in the applicant's decision process when they're evaluating the full financial package. Many years ago, we were fortunate enough that a retired professor from our college established a foundation fund that was set aside specifically to promote the research of our PhD students. And so this fund is managed by our doctoral policy committee, and currently we offer funding for first-year students to attend a premier conference just for the sake of seeing what a conference is like, getting their name out there, and professional development experience. Then in the second through the fourth years, students are able to request funding for a conference that they're presenting at that's a discipline-specific conference, and they're able to request funding for an additional conference if it's a premier one that they're presenting at. And then in the fourth year, we sponsor traveling for a job search conference. So for a conference that's going to be hosting interviews for their disciplines. And then we also have the opportunity that students can request up to $5,000 of dissertation expense funding for, data sets, anything that's going to help them along in the dissertation process. So that's something that's a little unique for our program that you may want to go back to your development or foundation folks and see if it's a possibility that you may be able to tap one of your retired faculty members or an alumni from your program that would want to earmark their funds, their donations for, future PhD students and promoting the success of the program. So I'll turn it back to you, Vassili.
So thank you very much, Stacee. Now we have time for questions. So Eva, please let us know which ones can be addressed and to whom they're addressed.
Okay, so the first question is from Sophia. She's asking whether candidates are still mainly looking for academically focused programs, or whether, for instance, that a responsible research agenda can also be a source of recruiting students, and if so, how to organize for that. So what are candidates looking for? Is there a shift maybe, or is it still the same?
So I think it could be a question for Mark. So you might have a broad overview of such demands.
I mean, I'll say very quickly. I think it's worth thinking about different demographics and audiences for this. So to stereotype horrifically your so-called kind of Generation Z, so the sort of current people coming from current undergraduate programs. Sorry. Yes, really big focus for them. Anecdotally, we definitely see that. But perhaps for older, return, I know one of the other questions is to do with people kind of coming back to doctoral study and so on. That might be slightly different. So I think it does depend on the segments.
Thank you very much for the very concise answer, Mark.
Second question also relates to recruitment, whether there are good practices to be shared about how to address inequalities within the recruitment process.
So this question is probably a question for American universities, and I think Brian could answer.
Yeah, I can give you an example of something that we're doing. And again, this is in partnership with our graduate school. We started 3 years ago a program that we call Bridge to the Doctoral Program. And the program is designed for folks that are from underrepresented populations. Now, again, it gets pretty complicated at US institutions because it sort of depends on the environment that you're in. In Michigan, we have a law that does not allow us to make decisions based on race or gender. And so we have different qualifiers that get at the underrepresented piece of it that allow us to have these kinds of programs. But But anyway, so we have this program and we can bring in students to our program. It's co-funded by our program and the graduate school. And those folks from underrepresented programs apply. They get a year with our faculty to engage in PhD-like work, sort of figure out what's this PhD all about. Do I like research? What kind of research do I like? Improve my quant skills, that sort of thing. So this is a way that we can bring underrepresented folks into our PhD program.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much for the detailed and concise answer at the same time. So back to you, Eva. One more question for now.
There's also
perhaps.
a question for Brian, also about the writing skills course you mentioned, whether it's only for international students or also for people for whom English is the mother language.
Yeah, it's a good question. This program is for all of our students. And it's designed to help them throughout the entire PhD program. So when they're first year students, they're focusing on writing a research statement. When they're second year students, they're working on their second year research paper. Third and fourth year, they're working on journal articles. In their fourth and fifth year, they're working on their dissertation. So, and then they're presenting at conferences along the way. So we want this to be something that the students can attend all the way through the program. We want them to start it in their first year, and we want them to then continue in the program as they're working on different kinds of projects.
Thank you very much, Brian, for this clear answer. Now it is time to turn to the third theme, which is how can we ensure a broad enough recruitment for a diverse doctoral student population? And here, Mark will give us a broad overview in the first place, and then we'll continue. Mark, your time.
Thank you very much, Vassili. I don't actually have a huge amount to say here. I think really for this section, the value will be added by my my fellow panelists really with their more direct experience of practice and so on. But one thing I will talk about really is the resources that different audiences use in their search, because there's a lot of variety. So obviously we've asked, are you looking, for example, at university websites, study fairs, conversations with prospective supervisors, current tutors, etc. And that varies quite interestingly actually by audience and by market. First up, they all use the university website. I think Brian said, in the first section, that is very important, and of course it is, and that's very obvious. Focus there first. I would just call back to most of the things Brian was saying. Really, get information up on your supervisors. Anecdotally, I'm surprised how many universities aren't that great at this. It can be quite hard, including my own alma mater, which I won't name here in the UK. It'd be very hard to work out what my PhD supervisor was actually supervising, which is a shame because they were great. Anyway, so get that stuff up. But if I was to talk about the actual audiences, so EU students, European students, most likely, according to our research, to look at peer networking, okay? So their most important things there, conversations with current PhD students, probably at their institution, if they're at an institution, or current tutors. So here, think about leveraging ambassadors and alumni and so on. When we look at UK and North American, so predominantly Anglophone audiences, these are most likely actually to use study fair events, which I think makes sense because these are more accessible to an Anglophone audience. There are lots of these, and obviously my organisation runs some, we're not the only one, and so on and so forth. Sound like the BBC there, don't I? But might be worth reviewing your presence at these kind of events if you have one. One thing I will say from an organisation that runs them, if you can send academics, that is brilliant. I know you'll have people in your marketing teams who are great and do great work, but at PhD level, if you've got someone that's actually involved in in supervising the program and running it, that it's just so helpful to get that extra advice, and it really will make you stand out. When we look at sort of ASEAN countries, if I was to kind of broadly define those, these are the biggest users of directory websites like ours, actually. Again, that makes sense. They're probably thinking of studying abroad. They're comparing lots of programs in lots of different places. For this audience, they really do. They really need those kind of key details defined. What's obvious to you may not be obvious to them, as doctoral study varies hugely around the world. in terms of its funding, its price, even its structure, how long it is, how it's examined, and so on. So, you know, think about those different markets. I'll also say that overall the prospectus is pretty low. You know, poor old prospectus. It's probably useful as a reference tool for students, but I don't think it's a big part of discovery. And again, you know, lots of different channels that students may be looking at. So again, a bit of an obvious point, but where you can try and ensure consistency. You know, your information is probably visible in lots of different places. Nothing is more confusing for a prospective student than seeing, you know, a fee or a funding option in one place and then some other place where maybe it's last year's info and it's out of date and so on. It just, you know, instantly it's going to cause them to kind of bounce off and they'll start elsewhere and so on. You know, potentially you might lose that prospect. And really, I think that's it for me on this section. I'll hand over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this overview, Mark. Now, Stacee, you might have things to add to this. And I think also there are things that were discussed just before and that relate to this and on which you might want to scaffold. So please.
Yes, thank you. So we're actually, one of the questions that we had talked about was, you know, the marginalized communities and how to make sure that we're recruiting those. And I will address that. So I think the first step when looking at diversity in the program is introspective. You need to look at your current student population and your alumni to determine where you're having diversity issues. And I would venture to guess that most schools do to some extent. I know we certainly do. So we've found that each of our concentrations or disciplines are somewhat unique in what regions of the world that they will typically attract applicants or what gender that they, you know, typically will attract. So the strategy has to be somewhat tailored. I wanted to just kind of share some trends that we saw from this current application period. So we have 4 different disciplines that we offer a concentration in. In our accounting concentration for this past recruiting cycle, we attracted a dead even between female and male on, you know, the gender. 68% of our applications were international, and of those 67% were from Asia and 16% from the Middle East. So we definitely have a stronghold in Asia, have a good number from the Middle East, but we're lacking in many other areas of the world. For our finance program, we are actually very heavy in male applicants. So we're 70% male for this past cycle and only 30% female. And that has been a trend for us. 78% of our applications for that discipline were international, with 52% of those coming from Asia and a third coming from the Middle East. In our information systems discipline, 42% of our applicants were female and 58% were male. And 90% of our applicants were international. So we're actually struggling with domestic applicants in that particular discipline. 63% of those international were from Asia and a third again from the Middle East. Our most diverse concentration is our marketing concentration. So in this one, we have 45% female applicants and 55% male. 67% of the total applications were international, but they were more spread across different regions. So 48% were Middle East, 30% from Asia, and 15% from Latin and South America, which historically for us has been a region that we've not attracted many applicants from. So overall, our programs attract the least amount of applications from Europe, Canada, and Africa. We try to evaluate the applicant pool each year to determine where we have a strong presence and where we don't. In regions where we rarely get applications, we try to leverage connections. That can be faculty, alumni, so on and so forth. Your faculty are really a great resource, but for those faculty that aren't actively working with your PhD program, sometimes taking part in these recruitment efforts can kind of fall off the radar. One thing that we are trying to leverage is that we have a very strong Fulbright record with professors in our college. And so those Fulbright professors become ambassadors for our college and our programs while they're overseas on their Fulbright in another country. One thing, going to the marginalized populations, we do participate in events like DocNet, the PhD project, each year to recruit minority groups. As a part of that, we make sure that we have a minority faculty present, and we also try to send one of our minority current students. We also try to focus on attracting applicants from historically Black colleges and universities in the US. And you need to make sure that you're staying connected to your alumni. So we host meetups for our alumni at our discipline-specific conferences throughout the year, invite them back as speakers periodically with our brown bag research series, with our current students, so on and so forth. And then, of course, you just need to make sure once they're here, once they've applied, you're providing a welcoming environment. So the efforts for that begin in the school. When you're doing your interviews, you want to make sure that you have a diverse interview panel with them. So try to make sure you have faculty from different backgrounds. That fosters a sense of comfort with them during the interview process. You might always also want to connect them with current students from different backgrounds. That may mean reaching across disciplines to find a student who's from their particular region. But that's something that we find that is important. And then once they arrive on campus, creating the welcoming environment for them there, introducing them to students, faculty, staff from a similar background as them, making sure that the current students are involved in getting them settled in to their offices, welcoming them, connecting them to resources on campus. The list goes on, but I will turn it over to Brian now to discuss some ideas.
Thank you very much, Stacee. Now, Brian, you can, I'm sure you will build on everything that has been done and said before. Please.
Yeah, and I'll sort of dovetail on some of what Stacee said. So for me, it's really important that you're developing relationships with institutions and organizations that represent diverse populations. And so Stacee mentioned the PhD project, and again, this may be more specific to institutions in the US, but the PhD project promotes the PhD in business to underrepresented communities. So in order to be a member of the PhD project, you have to be African American, Latinx, or Native American. And so when you go to that conference to do recruiting, you know that you're speaking to a very diverse set of individuals. And so it's a really easy way for you to reach an audience that will help diversify your student population. Another thing that Stacee mentioned was working with historical Black colleges and universities, more broadly working with what we refer to as minority serving institutions. So institutions that serve African American, Latinx populations, Native Americans, that sort of thing. One of the things that DocNet has been working on is to have a recruiting event with Spelman College, which is a college in Atlanta that is a historically Black college. And there are two other institutions in Atlanta that they're partnering with. And so unfortunately, COVID sort of put that off to the side. We had to cancel that event, but we do plan on bringing it back once we can all be back in person again. Related to that, one of the things that we feel is really important is to go where the populations are. And so in the past for us, what that meant was going to a variety of different locations. So it could be making sure you're recruiting on the West Coast, making sure in the US, making sure you're recruiting on the East Coast, but it also means going to Europe, going to South America. So we are planning events across the globe now, where it used to be that we were only focused in the US. The other thing that we found because of COVID is that hosting virtual events is a really nice way to bring in a much more diverse audience. We had to cancel all of our in-person DocNet events this past year, but what we did is we planned a week-long recruiting event, and we allowed institutions to develop what time and day they wanted to host an event, but we sort of built a structure around it. And what we found is that the registration for the event was probably 4 times as much as we get for an in-person event. So instead of getting about actually even more than that, because we typically will get somewhere between 50 and 200 registrations for an in-person event. And for the virtual event, we had over 1,000 people that registered for that event. And so each institution was able to then bring students within that large registration to their individual event. And that, I think, ended up working really well for folks. So I think most of our membership will be doing virtual events in the future to reach a more diverse population. The other thing that's really important is that the diversity that you're trying to reach, they need to be able to see themselves in your recruiting material. So you need to make sure that you're looking at your website, at any publications you're pushing out, to make sure that the folks that you're trying to recruit are represented in those materials. That's really important. It signals to them the kind of environment they're going to step into if they were to take a serious look at your institution. And I think I'll turn it back over to Vassili.
Thank you very much, Brian. Now we've got quite a bit of time ahead of us for questions and other reactions from the audience. So Eva, if there are some questions that we've not answered yet and which are still left, we have time to discuss those. And if you see new ones, please let us know.
Yeah, I think the main question that is not answered yet is about diversity in terms of the doctoral programs. So we have full-time students, part-time students, DBA students. So each of them probably might have different expectations. And the question is, should you diversify your recruitment efforts to them, or do you just treat them as one group of potential PhD students? Maybe Stacey, do you have a response to that question?
Sure. So actually our institution has a variety of doctoral programs, a portfolio of them. That we have the traditional PhD in business administration with those disciplines that I discussed earlier. But we also have a doctorate of business administration program that would address the needs of those who are career individuals who are looking for their credential. So our recruitment efforts are separate for those because the goal of those students are different. We do have doctorate of business administration students who would be looking for a job in academia potentially, but most of them are looking to stay in industry. And because the goal of the student and the goal of the program as far as what would happen with those students upon graduation is different, we keep the recruitment separate. We also have a third program which is housed in the College of Business, but it is an interdisciplinary program that's the PhD in big data analytics, and that we recruit separately for as well, again because the outcomes of those students would be different. If the eventual career aspirations of those programs were meant to be the same, we would do recruitment efforts together, but because they are so different, we do them separately.
Thank you very much, Stacee. It would be interesting, I think, having Brian's viewpoint on this question as you're sharing similar concerns in different states.
Yeah, and I really can't speak to this question because our program is on full-time only, so we don't have any other options for our students. I can tell you though, we do get questions from our prospective students about, is it possible for us to do the program while still working? So I know that there are folks out there that really have a strong desire to have other options, but we don't provide it.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question for Mark based on this discussion, which is when you are approached by prospective students, do you notice similar concerns based on age groups, I mean maturity, or do you see different concerns when they want to do a full-time, part-time program, or are questions really different because it's different worlds?
I mean, there's a huge amount of variety. So yes, I mean, when we're talking to older students, I'm always there is such a vast. I think we're talking here today about business programs and so on. So you guys are used to, I think, recruiting more mature students. But speaking more generally, I think there's a lack of awareness of just how many people do want to go into doctoral study later in life. Too much focus, I think, on undergraduates and so on, people graduating. And so older students are often they just want to know. Often they're worried they might be prejudiced against when it comes to funding, for example. That's a really recurrent concern. Often they feel they will be. So yeah, I mean, part-time, I think people just are very, very confused about part-time in general. They're not like, the first question I ask is, can I actually do a PhD part-time? To which the answer is almost always yes, in principle. A lot of them are surprised to learn that. So yes, the questions are very, very different.
Okay, thank you very much for this, again, concise answer. Eva, do we have questions that have not been answered yet?
Yeah, there was one earlier question about self-funded PhD students. So that Mona Lisa mentioned that she notices that people are more hesitant to engage in this due to uncertainty in these times. How can you motivate people to still engage in a PhD if they have their own funding?
With just one thing, Stacee, this question is irrespective of the pandemic. The pandemic is hopefully not going to last forever, so it is probably a general trend question.
Yeah, I can speak to this question a little bit because we do get quite a number of self-funded applications. So, we try to make sure that these students are still integrated within our program. The one issue that we find is, students who are here on our funding have a work requirement. And so they're working on an assistantship. The first 2 years, they're typically working on a research assistantship, and the second 2 years they're working on a teaching assistantship. Since a self-funded student's not getting funding from us, it's hard to mandate that they would receive these same experiences. So I think it's really on the onus on the program to make sure that they engage these students from the beginning and get them excited about something that they can participate in on campus. So they may not be mandated to spend 20 hours a week with a research faculty, but perhaps you can match them with a research faculty, and that would boost their interest in going ahead and get starting with the program and keep them engaged on campus. That's the biggest problem that we have seen with self-funded students, is that engagement and the progression, making sure that they are hitting all the same milestones that a funded student would hit.
Okay, thank you very much. And we might have time for one more question.
Yeah, there's one more question to Stacee as well, whether DBA and PhD students, do they follow the same courses? Are they in the same classroom, and are the same requirements to graduates for those two types?
Sure, that's a really wonderful question. So we actually do share a core curriculum between the PhD in Business Administration and the Doctorate of Business Administration. So there are core classes that are shared between them. They're not in the same classroom together though, because our PhD program is a full-time daytime program, where our DBA is a hybrid program. So they're on campus one weekend each month, and then they're online for the rest of the program. So it's the same faculty teaching the courses and it's the same content, but they're not in the classroom together. Now, we do try to foster a sense of a community across the two programs. So we do provide events, presentations, brown bag events, so on and so forth, so that the two programs do have a sense of community. Also, because the DBA students are working in industry, many times they come up with very relevant and unique research ideas that then get passed along to our PhD students as a potential for publication between, both programs.
Thank you very much, Stacee. And just before we leave this room, if the three speakers could give us in a tweet, so 140 signs, so very brief and with selected hashtags, what you would like us to retain, please do. If you're not certain, it does not matter. But if you want to conclude on 140 signed. We'll still have a few seconds for this.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the themes is collaboration. Again, given you're probably a one-person, maybe a two-person office, I think it's really important that you think about collaborating with folks.
That's several tweets, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
Thank you. So it is now 2 o'clock. Unless, Mark, you want to post your tweets, we'll have to vacate the room and go to the serious games, which I'm sure you will all enjoy. So thank you very much, all of you. And if you have more questions and things to discuss, post them on the discussion boards. Participants and speakers are more than welcome and encouraged to visit the discussions board and interact. So thank you, and see you soon with the serious games.